So, after the terrible hardships unleashed by the currency swap, Nigeria's Supreme Court has lifted this Friday's deadline and ruled that people can continue using the old Naira notes. As you know, the introduction of the new Naira is causing a cash crisis. There have been chaotic scenes at banks as people struggled to get the new notes, with some people stripping off their clothes as a sign of protest and fights breaking out at cash points. So that's the context of this Supreme Court ruling. A decision that came after a legal challenge initiated by the northern states of Kaduna, Kogi and Zamfara. Their lawyers argued that the central bank's policy had led to an excruciating situation that is almost leading to anarchy in the land.
We invoked the original decision of the Supreme Court. When there's a dispute between the state government and federal government, it's one of the few occasions where Supreme Court has the original jurisdiction. So we invoked the powers of the Supreme Court to hear this application. The reason for it is that as well-intentioned as this policy of federal government of Redesign is working hardship all over the country. As we can all see, banks are being harassed, Nigerians are suffering neglect, especially the downtrodden. Those in the urban areas, they're having problems, but it's more excruciating at the rural area. So these three state governments, Kaduna, Zamfara and Kogi, deem it fit for us to invoke the powers of Supreme Court to intervene. And the Supreme Court has not just the final court, but a court of policy in its considered ruling, saw merits in the application and restrained the federal government and by extension the Central Bank of Nigeria from desisting from going ahead on 10th of February that the supply of the new notes will stop.
Well, in a moment, I'll be joined for reaction by the Deputy Director of Public Affairs at the PDP Presidential Campaign Council, Chijioke Agu. He's already seated here with us and we'll dip into the conversation as we make progress. But first, I'm joined in the studio by the lawyer, economic analyst and lead director at the Center for Social Justice, Eze Onyekpere. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, both of you. But let me come to you first, Eze. I understand it's called status quo antebellum. That's what it's called in law. That's what the Supreme Court has said, but it hasn't decided the matter, has it? It's only granting an interim order, essentially saying, hold off until we hear the case in full.
That's very true. And of course, the return date is on the 15th of February. What has happened is that the Supreme Court gave this order based on the deposition and the statement of just one side of the case, okay? The states who felt that they had a dispute with the federation or with the federal government and approached the Supreme Court in accordance with Section 232 of the Constitution to invoke the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So until that 15th, the Supreme Court simply said, let's maintain the status quo, don't enforce the deadline until you come back to court, and maybe if the parties show reason, the CBN or the federal government show reason why that order shouldn't have been made in the first place, it may be vacated.
Right, but the deadline to stop using the old Naira notes is suspended by 5 days. Yes. But realistically, I mean, it could go beyond that date of February the 15th and even beyond February the 25th, which is the date for the presidential election.
That's true, because we expect a lot of lawyers, senior advocates, to begin the fireworks at the Supreme Court and all manners of technicalities, objections, and things that need to be raised. And of course, our Supreme Court is quite busy with a backlog of cases, including the cases that will also come up following the election petitions that will come after the election. So it's possible that after the 15th, the next adjourned date may likely be beyond the 25th of February when the presidential elections will be held.
Right. There was, of course, a previous High Court order saying it can't be suspended. Now we've got the Supreme Court ruling. Just for the sake of the lay person on the streets in Nigeria, is there some confusion here? Because obviously the Supreme Court is top of the food chain, isn't it?
The Supreme Court is the final and apex court in the land. So whatever it says is the law. I mean, appeals go from the Federal High Court or the High Court to the Court of Appeal before it gets to the Supreme Court. So whatever was stated by the Federal High Court or the High Court is no longer the actual position of the law for now, once the Supreme Court has ruled on it.
Now, we're hearing some news circulating that the central bank deadline won't change. That's the February the 10th, because the CBN and the commercial banks were not joined as parties in this suit. I'm reading that the three state governments simply took advantage of the fact that in matters purely between the states and the federal government, the Supreme Court can serve as a court of first and only instance, and that joining the CBN in the matter immediately robs the Supreme Court of jurisdiction. So the suggestion is that the Supreme Court decision is academic. To the untrained, unlegal mind, what does all this mean?
I do not think it's proper for any person to sit in his room or in his office to declare the judgment of the Supreme Court academic. I think that is a position that will have to be canvassed, to say the proper parties are not before the court on the return date, and to say that this is not a proper matter to invoke the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court because the CBN and maybe the commercial banks were proper parties, and Section 232 merely envisaged disputes between the states or disputes between the federation and the state. So these are issues to be canvassed, and not for anybody to stay within the confines of his room to say that the Supreme Court decision is academic or will not hold. I mean, that sounds more or less as being in contempt of the powers of the court.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for setting out the legal case. We will engage with you in the course of this conversation when I'll ask you to wear both hats that you have, which is one of them the legal one, the other one being the one as a member of an NGO and in the civil society community. But let me come to you, Mr. Agu, and of course you are the Deputy Director of Public Affairs at the PDP Presidential Campaign Council. Thank you very much indeed for your patience and for joining us. What is your reaction to this ruling? Because the PDP has said over and over again that it stands by CBN's policy.
Well, Charles, thank you very much for, for having me around. Let's go to how this whole process started. You recall that the central bank, within its constitutional rights, decided with the approval of maybe the presidency to redesign some notes of the Naira notes, right? And gave timelines for the old notes to become non-legal tender. Of course, this created a whole lot of disruptions in the financial ecosystem because people had to battle with returning old notes and being able to get the new notes. That was what prompted the presidential candidate of PDP, Atiku Abubakar, to make a passionate appeal to the federal government run by APC to consider a little extension of the timeline to encourage non-banked communities, to encourage the vulnerable society to be able to have access to the new notes. Okay? This is because of the structure of the way the PDP is, where we encourage inclusion. Now, what has happened is that the APC-led federal government, in line with their regular flip-flops in policy decisions, are now fighting themselves on the same programs that is part of their government.
Yeah, but I'm eager to know what your reaction is to this judgment.
The reaction is very simple. The reaction is very simple. We'll continue to encourage the central bank to keep to its mandate of making currency available to Nigerians. What we will very much frown at is that funny feeling that some individuals are stacking up money to be able to monetize the upcoming presidential elections.
Yeah, but what do you think this judgment by the Supreme Court? I mean, you heard the lawyer there, Onyekpere, saying that it could potentially go beyond the 15th, even into past the 25th date for the presidential election.
That is where the message is actually for the average Nigerian.
Right.
Because they need to see through what is going on.
But there's not much you can do about it if the
what
Supreme Court makes that decision.
What they can do is very simple.
Right.
They need to be put on notice that some people are trying to rig the system. Okay? And be able to resist that rigging of the system. That's the position of the PDP.
How?
You resist that weakening system by ensuring that people do not buy your votes. Ensuring that people do not buy your votes.
Right.
If we are going to have to go through this hardship again in another 4 years, I don't think Project Nigeria will still remain in existence. It's possible. You're already seeing the desperation. That is what is encouraging state governors who are dealing with insurgency in their various states, have never done anything about it, and I'm beginning to get so interested in currency redesign, up to a level of thwarting a process to ensure that the Supreme Court turns into a state versus federal government matter. It's important we understand what these dynamics are leading to, and it's important we see the threats this portends for democracy. It's also a note of warning, I must say something. As we're going to build up to the elections, the judiciary is a major bastion of this electoral process, and the level of their integrity is very important to the success of this process. It's about time we begin to ask ourselves, because the world is watching us. We have seen what happened in Osun State. We have seen where 2 senators in the last 1 week were given tickets without running for primaries. We are seeing this judgment today. I don't have the authority or the powers to question the Supreme Court. But I think it behoves on all of us to know that we owe this country a responsibility to create a just society. And the judiciary is a major plank of it.
Right. Let me bring you in, Eze Onyekpere. I asked you to wear, we said you were wearing 2 hats. You're a lawyer, but you're also the lead director of the Center for Social Justice. So you're also in the NGO CSO camp.
We do a lot of economic analysis.
Yeah, and you're also an economic analyst. And civil society organizations have been very supportive of the CBN Naira redesign policy, ostensibly because they see it as a means of checkmating corruption, corrupt politicians, vote buying, and all the rest of it. In that regard, wearing that hat, what's your reaction to the Supreme Court?
I think we need to clarify this concept of civil society. Everybody reacts to situations like this based on the knowledge available to him. My position at the Center for Social Justice is that what is happening today need not have happened in the first place. When the governor of the central bank announced that Nigerians should return their money, Nigerians went to the bank, most of us, to return the money, the old notes. What should have happened and the expectation was a seamless exercise. You pay in your old notes and have access to the new notes as you are paying them in, okay? So that you can continue your day-to-day business. If that had been done from day one, there wouldn't have been a clamor for extension after the 31st. You recall banks were still paying the old notes the Friday to the Sunday, to the Tuesday. I personally went to the bank and collected old notes. Now, what I'm saying in essence is that banking is built on confidence and trust. The trust that you can give somebody your money to hold, and that at any point in time you need your money, he will deliver it to you without any hassles, without any preconditions. Now, what is happening today is that people put their money in the banks and they cannot access it. And the money transfer systems that we have said, okay, let's demonetize, let's use the transfer systems, they are not effective. They are not working. Maybe they were designed for 20 million transactions in a day, and suddenly they are faced with handling 80 to 100 million. So in essence, the central bank is at the center of all these challenges. What they needed to have done was to push more liquidity into the system, and these problems will not have arisen. This clamor now.
In fairness, the central bank are saying that they're not the ones who are, that they actually put money into the system.
That's not true.
But the commercial banks
that's not true.
Hoarded them.
That's not true, because if the commercial banks had hoarded them, first of all, why do you need to hoard or to create provision for arbitrage in the first place? It is scarcity. Who was hoarding this money by November last year? Who was hoarding it in October? When you create that sense of scarcity, when people are coming to collect money and clearly they are not accessing their money, nobody should tell us that story, okay? Because there's a figure put out there by, I think it's El Rufai or somebody, I can't recall now, that only money worth about 300 billion have been minted, new notes. And CBN has told us that they have sucked in 2.1 trillion. You took in 2.1 trillion and printed only 300 billion what? That is 1/7. So there will be that scarcity.
Right.
So what I'm saying in essence is that CBN can even solve these problems tomorrow. I'm not saying they should release exactly what has been put in. Release a sizable amount of money And then this issue of people hoarding it will no longer arise.
Okay, let me bring you in, Mr.
Yes,
Agu, because part of the issue here is the fact that at the heart of the policy was an attempt to try and prevent, that's one of the things, prevent politicians from using money to buy votes. And if you make that money hugely available, as it was, as the old Naira notes were, then you defeat the whole purpose, don't you? So it was a matter of being fairly restrictive in the amount of money that was introduced and the speed with which it was introduced into the system. The idea, presumably, being to let the elections happen, and then you can introduce a lot more money into the system. Well, what is your take on that?
You see, the PDP as a party and its presidential candidates talking with him, you will see one clear sign. We stand with the people on this problem, right? We are not unaware of the fact of the sufferings Nigerians have been going through. That's why I mentioned the word policy flip-flops. I'll give you an example, Charles. Ford Motors is going back to Formula One in 2026. A few days ago, they announced it. What does it portend? It's called planning, okay? By 2026, they'll be back in Formula One. What we have is an APC government that just decided to change the currency in a couple of months. There's nothing that's playing out now that the responsible government should not have envisaged. Both the backlog, both the ability of Nigerians to be last moment people, these are all the things that people on the back end are supposed to have dealt with in the first instance. Now going into the various problems people are now finding themselves today, we're more bothered about the underbanked, the itinerary trader, the people who don't readily have access to banking facilities, and how they will have this access. Now, what does this Supreme Court judgment portend? An issue has already arisen. Like my friend rightly said, so many trillions have already gone back into the CBN vaults. Are you encouraging CBN to release those monies back into the economic system? Are you encouraging the banks to continue to pay out those monies into the banking system? You see how you've created this whole confusion. It's all a machination to truncate the upcoming elections, create crisis so that Nigeria becomes ungovernable.
And you think the Supreme Court is a party to that?
I will not be able to judge the Supreme Court, but I know that every Nigerian owes a responsibility to ensure that we continue with this our democracy. It's very important that we understand the responsibilities of every citizen in this process.
Right, Mr. Onyekpere, you wanted to come in there.
The point I want to make is what many Nigerians have not thought through. The central bank is operating from the philosophy of money solveth all problems, which is not true. When the airlines had a crisis, CBN threw money outside of the Ministry of Aviation. When we said we are not producing enough food, CBN threw money. Uncle Bora's program outside of the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, it is not the duty of CBN, it's not part of the core mandate of CBN to chase issues around money laundering.
Yeah, but we're talking about monetary policy.
Or terrorist financing, or the issue of vote buying. This belongs to agencies which have this as their core mandate. INEC should be the one leading on vote buying. It may invite CBN to join it. The DSS, EFCC, these are the ones that should be interested in terrorist financing. Or
but in fairness,
what I'm saying is that the core mandate of CBN, price stability, maintaining a sound financial system.
Yeah, but also monetary policy.
These are part of monetary policy in Section 2 of the Act, and building up our external reserves. So all these things, your Naira redenomination should have been in pursuit of that larger picture. But all these agencies should have been leading this process and inviting the services of CBN.
But the idea, though, and I don't mean to interrupt you, I apologize, but the idea is that the monetary policy is supposed to help create a conducive environment for economies to thrive. Yes. I mean, that's the whole idea of it. And there are adjuncts to that. Yes. In other words, if the monetary policy will eliminate corruption within a society and allow it to thrive, there is nothing potentially wrong with a central bank saying that We are making this monetary policy with this intention in mind, because ultimately it will serve the purpose for which we were created.
I'm saying, if monetary policy solved all problems, as CBN wants us to believe, this is why we ran into this crisis we are running into today. If it was a question of deposit your money and collect some part of the new notes, we wouldn't be having this crisis. And if you had wanted monetary policy to solve all these challenges we have, there should have been adequate planning. After you planning, you conduct some level of action research. After that, you do some simulation. After the simulation, before you go into the field, and then in the course of implementation, if you find serious challenges, you go back on what is called course correction. Everything happening looks like a knee-jerk reaction.
Right.
Okay.
So
that's why I'm finding it problematic. I would have loved INEC to be leading challenges of vote buying, and in the process, you use interagency collaboration. If there is something CBN can do for you, you bring CBN in. Let EFCC lead issues about economic crimes, money laundering. If there's anything CBN can do, let CBN, rather than CBN now inviting people to come and perform their core mandate. You don't use, a monetary policy has to go in tandem with fiscal policy.
You have to remember, let's not belabor this point. You have to remember that INEC has been banging on about vote buying for a long time.
So what are they doing?
Okay, no. What I'm saying is that you could make the argument that they did bring in the CBN, but CBN is the one who has to announce the issues around monetary policy. But anyway, listen, we've got a couple of minutes to go. Quickly, let's hear what you have to say.
To be very clear, I mean, with all due respect, I think my colleague is just being speculative, because I don't think it's on record anytime CBN said that the reason why they're embarking on this policy are these points we've raised. I think it was more about curbing inflation and getting more money into the banking system, the unaccounted for part of the economy. I think that was the reason behind all this thing. Well, fairly I agree that the government, just like so many of its policies, right, does not see it through. I want to be corrected if there's any place in the 2022 appropriation where this provision was made for the cost of this currency. It means that the whole process wasn't very well thought out and wasn't very well followed through. These are the issues we're talking about, because we stand on the part of Nigerians. The people are suffering because of these are consequences of inaction and clear leadership failure. Because when you want to just take out the CBN and put the blame on the CBN, you also have to understand that the CBN governor and his got authorities to do what they are doing. And these authorities are coming from the APC government. Right. Now, it becomes very funny that the three governors who have gone to court to challenge this policy are APC governors who are strongly supporting APC to continue to rule Nigeria after May 29th. Right? You ask yourself, what's the reason why they're having parties as we speak, celebrating the fact that CBN has asked that the old money continues to be legal tender, the central bank, sorry. What's the fun for? You see all of them on social media, they're celebrating it. Right. What does it portend? Okay. It portends what the intention was originally. The intention originally, which we still suspect it is an idea to monetize the electoral process.
Right. Well, we certainly hope not.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have to leave it there. I want to thank two of you very much indeed, and I apologize, but we have to move on to other items. And the Chijioke Agu is the Deputy Director of Public Affairs at the PDP Presidential Campaign Council, and Eze Onyekpere is the lawyer, economic analyst, and lead director at the Center for Social Justice. Thank you very much indeed.